Peace, peace, peace. Welcome to another episode of Wild's the Dome TV. Today, I have a very, very special guest. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Bakari Lumumba, educator, scholar, committed Pan-Africanist. His work centers around Pan-Africanism, racial identity, Black education, and resistance to anti-Blackness. Um, Wonderful scholar, man. He also has a YouTube channel that you can check out. But Dr. Lumumba, thank you for coming to Wazadome TV. You are very much appreciated, brother.
I appreciate you having me here.
Indeed, indeed. Let's start from the beginning. I kind of like to ask everybody whose first time is on the show, what kind of radicalized you? Was it like a moment, that a specific moment, or just kind of, just being around the movement, or a book, or what was it that kind of sparked that in you?
So yeah, I think I had some indelible moments in my early childhood. So I would say first, I was, I think, 4 or 5 years old, and my parents had a book collection, Ebony
Mm,
Pictorial History of Black America book collection.
mm,
So I remember scrolling through the books, and I saw a picture of Joseph Cinque,
mhm,
we all know
mhm.
led the Amistad Slave Rebellion, right? Uh, there was a painting of him, statuesque, handsome, masculine, powerful. So I'm like, okay, get it in, right? Second, I remember coming across a section I talked about Marcus Garvey,
Mhm.
and it said that he wanted us to go home. So I remember
Wow.
saying, as a 5-year-old boy, I like him,
Right,
right?
right, right,
And
right.
third, there was a drawing, a depiction of us packed on slave ships.
Mm,
Now, and I recall vividly going to my mother and saying, "Who did this to us?"
mhm,
And
mhm,
she said, "White people." And I'm like,
mhm.
all right, that's all I need to know. Right? That's all I need to know. So I go through school, and the kind of the joke was, okay, Bakari, which wasn't my name at the time, doesn't like white folk. I get to seventh grade. I'm in at McFarland Middle School in the inner west side of Dayton, Ohio. Shout out to the Gym City 937 in the house. And the school is probably 98% black.
Mhm,
We have a white English teacher. I remember standing up in the middle of class, March of 95,
mhm.
and stating, when are we going to read a book about black people?
Mm, mm.
Sit
How?
down. No. When are we going to read a book about black people? This is a black school. This is a black, and we haven't read a book about black person yet. And of course, I call my parents. My parents like, listen, I ain't the way you handle situations, yada, yada, yada. Um, I get to high school. Okay.
Mhm,
National
mhm.
Junior Honor Society, Who's Who America's Top High School Students.
Wow.
I'm even National Honor Society.
Mhm.
By the time I finished high school, I didn't even think I was college material. That's how much they
Wow.
dumbed me down.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Mm,
Yes. So we talk about when Malcolm X said, the schools are killing fields."
mhm,
When Jawan Kunjufu, who just transitioned, is now an ancestor, said the schools are in on it. They dumbed me down to
mm.
the point that when I graduated, I didn't think I was college material. So I joined the military.
Wow.
I
Wow.
joined the Navy.
Mhm.
So mind you, I'm a YN now, right?
Mhm.
I go to basic. My best friend and I, we met in first grade. We go to basic together. I get voted most likely to get kicked out of the Navy in basic training.
Mm.
10 months
Hold
later,
on, hold on,
I
hold
was,
on. You get voted most likely to get kicked out.
yes. True story.
Uh-huh.
10 months later, guess
Mhm.
what happened?
What happened?
I
You
got
got
kicked
kicked
out
out.
for
Oh
misconduct.
man. Oh man.
Yeah. So I come back home. My parents are like, what the French toast is going on here, right?
Right, right.
Long story short, now I'm kind of, be quite honest with you, I spent probably about 5 years of my life being a miscreant, right?
Hmm.
Really had lost myself.
Hmm.
So I joined the National Guard to try to make up for what happened in the Navy,
Hmm.
and they're giving me money to go to school.
Mm.
So I said, okay, I'm gonna go to college. I'm at a community college. I'm a major in Black Studies, but I don't really know how to be a student, so I'm chasing girls, skipping class, da 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 da.
Yeah.
Came across a professor who's from Liberia, and I'm like, man, this college thing isn't for me. I had a
Hmm.
zero point 0.6 GPA, cum,
Hmm.
after 2 semesters, a zero point 0.6. So he says to me, oh, well, that's typical. African American man like you, young man like you face an intellectual challenge, you're going to bitch up. You're going to capitulate
Mm.
and, go leave with your tail between your legs. I'm like,
What?
who you
Right.
talking to?
Right, right,
He says,
right.
he's like 50 something years old. I'm talking
Hmm.
to Y. O-U.
Mm,
So, man, you ain't talking to me like you crazy. He said, I'm talking to you.
mm,
He said, you told me you were Kobe Bryant on the basketball court, Jerry Rice on the football field, right? That
mm,
you were extremely competitive, but now you face a challenge intellectually, academically, and you're capitulating.
mm.
He says, let me ask you a question. Now, I still remember what I had on. I had on a Coogee track jacket, some black jeans, some Jordan 8s, and some sunglasses. I still remember this 360 waves. And he says, let me ask you this question. He says, who are you?
Mm,
And I said, I don't know.
mm,
And he said, I can tell.
mm,
He says, this is what I want you to do. Summer's coming up. Don't register for classes during the summer. Register for the fall. Take the summer off to get yourself together. Come back in the fall. That's how I did that.
mhm,
He pushed me to come to a meeting for an organization on campus called Able Youth Leaders, Alliance for the Betterment of Leadership and Education. I ended up finding out it was a Pan-Africanist student group focused on
mm,
political and academic development. So I show up to the meeting. I'm cracking jokes. Everybody looked at me. Hey, we don't do that here.
mm.
Okay. And I
Yeah,
remember saying to myself, they're serious about life. I said, I want to be serious too.
right,
So I
right.
joined the organization. I ended up getting a 4.0 that semester.
Oh,
Within a year's time, I was the president of the org.
wow,
And I took off
wow,
from there.
wow. You took
Yeah.
that challenge and
Mhm.
now you're the Dr. Bakari K. Lumumba
Yeah.
that we all
Yes, yes.
know and love
And
and
what
appreciate.
what I appreciate and what I learned was one of the because I work in higher education.
Mhm.
One of the foundational tenet of first wave student development theory is challenge and support.
Mm.
Yeah, we
Challenge
talk
and
about,
support.
yeah. Mhm.
It reminds me of whenever I was in school, I didn't have as early as elementary school, I didn't always have the words to articulate what was happening then, but I knew I was not being treated the same way
Right.
everyone else is being treated. And as somebody who's in education, how many of our young brothers and sisters, you know, get their educational aspirations crushed within the school system, but there's no body that, you know, I guess may have their back or somebody that can articulate this to somebody that could do something about it or even like how much of this goes unnoticed, you think, as far as
I think it's rampant. I think it's rampant. And so there's a couple things. One, representation matters, right? I
Mhm.
give an example. I have two children. My son is 18. My daughter's 15. I put them in chess when they were very young. We're talking about 4, 5, 6 years old. And I don't know if you play chess or not.
Yes. Mhm.
Okay, very good. We got to get a game in. I'm gonna
For
smash
sure,
you.
for
I'm gonna
sure.
give you that work, right?
I got you.
But what and as you know, chess tends to be a male
Mhm.
predominated space.
Yes.
And what ends up taking place is, so my daughter didn't take to it much, right?
Mhm.
Going here is all these boys, there's no women around. What ends up taking place is I was living in Columbus at the time, Columbus, Ohio, and there was a Chess for Queens program for Black girls.
Mm.
I take my daughter, she's 13, and right, at the time, she's 13 years old, ended up being a Black woman who was a chess master,
Wow.
came to the event, spoke, and talked to my daughter one-on-one for like 2 hours. We leave, go home, we eat dinner. My daughter said, hey, let's play chess. And she almost beat me. Like she was
Wow.
at me and it
Wow.
inspired her. So
Right.
representation matters one. The second
Mhm.
issue is, and you know this better than I, right? Is if you're a student, need to have Black faculty and staff, or we like to call sometimes institutional agents,
Mhm.
who are what African centered in their pedagogy.
Absolutely.
If not, they could be promoting the same miseducation
Mhm.
and what erasure that non-Black institutional agents engage do as well. So that plays a role as well. So it isn't just the individual
Mhm.
needs to be Black, right? Irrespective of one's nationality, but they have to also need to have a sense of racial consciousness and understanding of an African-centered educational paradigm, right? Being the director of Black Culture Center, can recall vividly when I was applying for positions and even interviewing that oftentimes I would interview with search committees who did not understand that.
Mm.
Right. And I
Right.
had to explain that if we don't teach and organize and develop from an African centered frame of reference, we will be promoting miseducation.
Absolutely. And I think that was one of the issues that I had um, at one point was even the subjects that we learned that are, considered universal,
Hmm.
they still did not, they still could have been, all right. So I went to an all black high school as well.
Okay.
And, but elementary and middle school it was more of a mixed school. But and even within this black school, there was nothing, kind of like the story that you told, there was nothing that related these subjects to who I was as a black person.
Yes.
So you feel
Yes.
divorced from this history
Yes.
or divorced from, the science that we're learning,
Hmm.
divorced from all of these different subjects because I don't see myself in it.
Correct. Correct. And that's an issue. I had a student who was thinking about dropping out.
Mhm.
This, we had this conversation earlier this summer, and I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, I'm a kinesiology major, and I have to take a physics class. Physics is science based, and that's not part of our culture." So, of course, I
Mm.
said, "Au contraire, mon frere,"
Right,
right? And we had a
right, right.
conversation about, you know, the science, math, and the connection with what our culture. He said, "You know what? I never thought about it that way."
Mm.
Right. And so that's a example of pushing against, of course, miseducation and of course the importance of having an African-centered educational frame of reference to where the students are able to see themselves in the subject matter.
Absolutely, and that you're right. That matters 100%. And so, speaking of Pan-Africanism, we're both Pan-African, and we understand its importance. But we're also seeing a new wave of criticism aimed at Pan-Africanism, particularly from nativist or assimilationist circles. What are your thoughts on these groups who love to proclaim Pan-Africanism is dead?
Right, right. And that's rather peculiar. As you know, my master's thesis was titled "Is Pan-Africanism is Dead?"
Yes,
And
yes.
so, and of course,
And it
I
is
think.
online, guys, so you guys can download that for sure and read that because I do have that as well. But go ahead.
And what we find is there are legitimate critiques one can have of Pan-Africanism.
Hmm.
But when you're in community or proximity with individuals who have critiques of Pan-Africanism, the critiques they make are ahistorical and adverse to facts.
Hmm.
Right?
Hmm.
I have a cousin now who is leaning more towards Pan-Africanism. And we probably had a conversation about 4 years ago. He said, I'm not in support of Pan-Africanism. I said, okay, that's cool. I was laying on my couch. Okay, cool, no biggie. And I said, well, humor me, why are you not,
Hmm.
of course, supportive of Pan-Africanism? And he listed probably about 7, 8 things that had nothing to do with Pan-Africanism. So then I
Hmm.
said, where'd you getting your information?
Right,
And he said, well, Tariq Nasheed.
right, right.
Right. And so I said, this is an example of someone being extremely disingenuous, right?
Hmm.
Because here's the thing, you don't have to be a scholar, but you know if what you're saying is factual or not, right?
Right.
I may not be a Chinese historian, but if I told you something about Chinese history, I would know if I know what I'm talking about or if I don't,
Absolutely.
right? And
Hmm.
so those are some of the issues that we tend to find in terms of individuals pushing against Pan-Africanism. As you know, YouTube channel, there was a brother who came on, he was FBA,
Hmm.
and I said it diversity of thought is welcome. He tapped in and he asked some questions about Pan-Africanism, and I answered them. And he even admitted, he says, I'm not a Pan-Africanist, but a lot of information I received was inaccurate.
Right,
And I
right.
said, yeah, and that's done purposely to what mislead you and manipulate you. I said,
Absolutely.
we don't proselytize. You don't have to be a Pan-Africanist. We're not the Jehovah's Witnesses, right? Right. But the information you're being provided about Pan-Africanism is adverse to facts. And that is an issue of concern. And then I think you should then ask the question to whoever provided you this information, why are you giving me inaccurate information, intel, right?
Hmm.
And so something to, of course, consider.
Something that we spoke off camera about when it comes to this type of thing, and you have people who are um, getting paid. They have these big platforms and they are agents of chaos and a lot of misinformation floating around. How important is it for those who are interested in these topics in regards to Black liberation to actually, at times, because I look at YouTube as a great companion, but it is
Mhm.
not your foundational tool. Can you just
Right.
tell the people, hey man, you got to read. Like
Absolutely.
there's no
Absolutely.
shortcuts around it.
Right. And I push that a lot. I've done episodes on my channel where we discuss what other core tenets of
Hmm.
Pan-Africanism, right?
Hmm.
And I actually cite the academic literature, right? We start with David Walker's Appeal, which was the first
Hmm.
written Black Nationalist or Pan-Africanist manifesto, right? We
Absolutely.
talk about the philosophies, opinions of Marcus Garvey. We talk about C.L.R. James' History of Pan-African
Hmm.
Revolt. We
Hmm.
talk about Hakeem Ada's book on Pan-Africanism. I'm sure you're familiar with all these
Absolutely.
literature. So I
Hmm.
say, you actually need to read. Of course, even I'm an administrator now, but when I was a professor of African American history, I pushed the students. I said, how do you actually learn history? By reading and reviewing the historiography.
Hmm.
Anyone can tell you anything
Right. Right.
unless you're doing the research yourself. And I explained to my students why I was not a supporter of students watching documentaries. They said,
Mm.
why? I said, because if you haven't reviewed the scholarly literature on this particular historical subject, how would you know that what the person saying in the documentary is factual? And I
Right.
tie that back to I'm gonna throw a jab here. Tariq Nasheed's Hidden Color
Oh
documentary,
yeah,
right?
that's so
When those
pseudo.
documentaries came out, I was an undergraduate student
Mhm.
majoring in African American studies, and then of course sociology. I was a double major because we can't have one in anything. We need two.
Right.
And so, as an undergraduate
Mhm.
student,
Mhm.
I'm watching the documentaries and I'm saying, "Hey, that's not accurate. Where are they getting this from?" And I was an undergraduate.
Right.
I wasn't even in grad school at the time, let alone a PhD.
Right.
But because so what we tend to find is a lot of times individuals know
Mhm.
most people don't have the time or the privilege or the luxury to
Mhm.
sit down and review the history of African people on the continent or in the diaspora or specifically here in the good old US of A,
Right.
right? So they're able to utilize that to manipulate, right, individuals to engage in certain behaviors and thought processes that oftentimes will provide them with a financial benefit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the main talking points that I hear from them, and you mentioned Dr. Hakeem Adi's book, History of Pan-Africanism, and it goes all through what I'm about to say. But one of the main talking points from them is that Pan-Africanism is a one-way street,
Mhm.
where African Americans are giving more than they receive. Um, as we understand, that is, historically just not true.
Yes,
But
yeah, that's the
as a
fact.
scholar, how do you respond to that argument?
Well, yeah, well, what I oftentimes ask individuals, can you provide some examples? Right.
Mhm.
And so we could get into specifics, the devils in the details, as they say. And I
Mhm.
said, well, can you provide some examples? And for example, I mean, you may know who Dinus Demir is.
Mhm.
And we did a show as a result of him making the claim that Marcus Garvey wasn't able to get it popping with Pan-Africanism until he went to the United States and got now an FBA. So then I said, well, how much have you reviewed literature on Marcus Garvey in
Right.
terms of Pan-Africanism? I said, well, you familiar with the fact that he was, of course, mentored by Robert Love, who, of course,
Mhm.
was from the Bahamas? Are you familiar with his apprenticeship with the brother Deuce Muhammad
Muhammad
Ali,
Ali.
who was, of
Hmm.
course, a Sudanese Egyptian, right? No. I said, so what you're saying is you don't know what the French toast you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I kind of respectfully and disrespectfully said, this is why you need to shut the French toast up and let people who actually know what the French toast they don't know handle their BI. Because you actually out here, what I mean? You're looking
Right.
bad out here.
Right.
Boy, you're looking bad. So these are some of the things that take place. But the pushback is the concept of the one-way street. I remember having, once again, an exchange with a member of FBA ADOS. And I said, were you aware? Matter of fact, I'm from Ohio, the great state of Ohio, the home of the reigning defending national champions in college football. And please forgive me, but I got to bring this up here, right? We on the cover, of course, of Sports Illustrated,
Yeah, I see.
right?
I see.
The last state standing. Just want to put that out there, right? So from Ohio, many people in the latest presidential election, 2024 presidential
Mhm.
election, may be aware of the fact that there were some claims about brothers and sisters in Haiti, particularly living in Springfield, which is really a
Oh yeah,
suburb
yeah.
of Dayton.
Hmm.
And the argument they were eating people's cats and dogs. We know this was actually
Yeah,
patently
yeah.
false. I wrote an article about this where we actually found that over the past 10 years in the state of Ohio, the great state of Ohio, all the individuals who have been accused of not only eating and harming household pets were white folk.
Right, right.
And so this is really what we saw with white projection. And even when I started my dissertation defense, I
Mhm.
began by stating, I have to say this with all the, courage that my soul can muster, that the animus
Mhm.
towards, of course, Haitian people is not based on what they allegedly eat, but
Mhm.
who they beat
Mhm.
220 some years
Absolutely.
ago, right? So
Hmm.
understanding that. But mentioning Haiti, people, because I was even on the news back home, and they said, "Well, why are you supporting the Haitians?" And I said, "Well, one, it's my duty,
Hmm.
right, as someone who was understands the history between Haitians and African Americans, to repay their benignity. Because when they liberated themselves, they could say, we're good, we're resting on our laws. They could have delineated and said, hey, you handle your BI because we defeated all our oppressors. The reality of the situation, I said, for numerous presidential administrations after their independence, the Declaration of Independence for the sovereign state of Haiti, they provided not only housing, but also they funded our travel and resettlement from the United States to Haiti. Tens of thousands of African Americans who are still in Port-au-Prince to this day, led by, of course, Bishop James T. Holly, right? So I said, what do we think? That's, of course, an example of Pan-Africanism not being a one-way street. When we talk about Muammar Gaddafi providing a $5 million interest-free loan to Louis Farrakhan, that is an
Hmm.
example of Pan-Africanism not being a one-way street. When we talk about numerous African nation states providing refuge to political activists from
Hmm.
the good old United States of America, we talk about
Absolutely.
Tanzania,
Hmm.
Ethiopia, we talk about one Algeria, Ghana,
Hmm.
Guinea, right? etc. Those That's an example of Pan-Africanism not being a one-way street. We talk about the brilliant work right now of Mia Motley, who of course
Absolutely.
is the Prime Minister of Barbados. That will be an example of Pan-Africanism not being a one-way street in the contemporary moment. Even historically, we talk about the civil rights movement, where we would kind of do a deeper dive on later in this interview. We know that there were African heads of state, African diplomats who were protesting at the international level of the treatment of African Americans during the Jim Crow era here in the good old United States of America, who that helped bring about the international pressure that led to the dismantling of formal legal segregation here in the United States of America. So once again, when we talk about Pan-Africanism being a one-way street, many people make this argument, one, because they're being intellectually disingenuous, and
Hmm.
two, because they're trying to manipulate individuals, right? It's almost like, and I don't know your religious background, but I'm quite sure you're familiar with the history of anti-blackness and Abrahamic religions, right?
Absolutely.
But when someone is trying to proselytize, they don't tell you about this history,
No, not at all.
right? Right, which means they're being manipulative because they're seeking to omit particular information to influence your not only your thinking but also your behavior. And we know true education is to provide all of us those perspectives, and then you allow an individual to make a decision for themselves based on factual information.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm glad you said that because again, I think it goes back to what we were speaking about earlier. Like you're going to have to literally read the works. You're going to have to read the, history of Pan-Africanism, the CLR James, Pan-African Revolt book, and all of these great scholars that we have. Like, even whenever we have conversations on YouTube about these great scholars that came before us, it still doesn't really do any justice to actually going and reading the works because these works are dense and it's full of history, theory, and we just have to be more familiar with this stuff if we're going to get out with a microphone and speak. But again, like you said, with a lot of these guys, it's not about the truth, right? It's about fulfilling an agenda, and in my opinion, that agenda is just founded in whatever the new grift is.
Mm.
It doesn't matter if it's harmful to us as a people, as long as somebody's
And,
getting
and,
paid.
and if I could, I know you're interviewing me, but I have to ask you a question.
Absolutely.
When you talk about the new grift, could you do a deeper dive? What do you mean by that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I feel like whenever we look at the Tariq Nasheeds, whenever we look at the 19 Keyses who are going to speak about in a few, there is so ever since slavery, we know that it was outlawed for us to read, but we still, well, and I know you know this more than anyone, um, but whenever we look at the development of Black education post-emancipation, um, we're literally responsible for the public school system in the South in a lot of ways, right? And so we've always had this need and this search for knowledge, even though it hasn't always been made accessible to us the way we would like, right? Whether it's, some people might not being able to be afford college, or others having their intellectual dreams crushed because of white supremacy within the public school systems. But that thirst for knowledge has never went away.
Right.
And so you have these people who are modern day charlatans. They quote unquote rap well. They can
Mm.
talk that with the best of them, and they are positioning themselves as thought leaders to a group that doesn't always have, as you mentioned, the luxury to spend time researching and reading.
Right.
Because as we know, there's a class component to study, right?
Yes.
And uh, a family that's working two jobs apiece to put food on the table may not have that same luxury to do a deep dive on CLR James and Dr. Huey P. Newton and Malcolm X and things of that nature, even if they are well intended. And so
Right.
you have these people like the Yvette Carnells, Tariq Nasheed's, 19 Keys, who, in my opinion, know and understand this and know that there is a demographic that will support and even pay money for the products centered around Black education that they are pushing. But the thing about it is, they are unqualified to uh, not only push this uh, uh, information, but what they're doing is um, counter-revolutionary,
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
and they are, and in my opinion, look, I have to say this because I don't have any proof, but I was speaking to a brother last night. A lot of these grifts, in my opinion, they're either and I know, and I'm going to separate the two because there's a few that I feel like are is just founded in ignorance, right? They don't know any better, but they have such a big ego that you can't tell them or correct them.
Right.
Others, I feel like may be founded in some type of three-letter organization, maybe founded in some type of
Mm.
right-wing think tank. Because we would look at Yvette Carnell, for instance, she got her start with anti-immigration right-wing think tank, and
Mm.
then suddenly appears to be a spokesperson for African American thought. And so they push themselves as these African American thought leaders, right? But they never mention real thought leaders such as yourselves, the Gerald Horns, the Dr. Gilmores, the the Dwayne Omawales, the Dr. CBSs. They never push anybody with real radical analysis that's going to give you a critique on imperialism, capitalism, and all of these other things. They'll give you feel good things
Right.
that pretty much are founded in a assimilationist approach to our
Militant
liberation.
assimilationism.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is white nationalism in blackface.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up because this is probably about 3, 4 years ago. I actually did a interview with Afro Elite,
Mhm.
right? And he is, of course, an acolyte of Tariq Nasheed, comes on the
Okay,
platform.
that's where I've heard that name from. Okay,
Yes,
okay.
we had a conversation, and this is when I was new to these YouTube streets,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
I was blown away by the fact that he did not care that the claims he was making were adverse to facts and ahistorical. So I had to keep stopping him, like, no, that's. I mean, you've watched my channel. I always say,
Mhm.
I don't allow people to make claims that are adverse to facts. This is my platform. I'm a scholar. If I disseminate this information without pushing back, that hurts my credibility.
Right.
He did not give a 747 blank though. Didn't care at all. And it blew my mind. And that's when I saw, I said, okay, this is not someone who is serious,
Right,
right?
right.
And of course, when he talked about our culture being completely destroyed during the Holocaust of enslavement, of course, he didn't make that claim as
Mhm.
articulate as I can.
Mhm.
Um, and I said, well, actually, no, we find that there's
Mhm.
a large amount, a copious amount of scholarly literature on African culture, retention, and African American culture.
Absolutely.
I said, sent him this information via Twitter, no response. I said, the claim that the pushback against Pan-Africanism, the claims you were making about Pan-Africanism were adverse to facts. But I said, here's some literature on Pan-Africanism to where you can make an accurate critique of Pan-Africanism. I sent him the literature. Of course, it was marked as seen. He never responded. And then I found that he still was making the same claims that were ahistorical and adverse to facts years later. So it shows there is an actual care or concern about
Hmm.
providing factual information to the masses, to the people. But what promoting a concept, an idea, and even I would argue in some ways a brand,
Hmm.
right, that
Hmm.
they believe will bring about monetary gain. And the reason why I
Absolutely.
say that, I even wrote an article titled I'm Blacker Than You about the
Hmm.
rise of FBA and ADOS. And one of the things I mentioned was that oftentimes when we talk about some of the leading proponents of this anti-Pan-Africanist concept and idea, many of them at one point were promoting Pan-Africanism because it was
Oh yeah.
financially beneficial for them to do so,
Hmm.
expensive for them to do so. We talk about Tweak Nasheed, we
Hmm.
talk about Hidden Colors, we talk about the 1804,
4 documentary.
right? And
Hmm.
now people ask, I remember my son was like, well, you can watch the documentary. I said, I don't need to. I've already read up on the history. I
Hmm.
know what happened. I don't need to watch a documentary.
Hmm.
Right, right.
Right.
Second, we talk about Yvette Cornell. She was hosting a number of conferences under the guise and auspices of what Pan-African unity, irrespective of one's ethnicity and nationality, when they come together as Black folk and get it in, right? Put in the work needed and necessary to better the material and, of course, social, political, and economic conditions of African people, irrespective of where you're living. When that dried up, right, and we know
Hmm.
there were issues with her conferences, that people had paid and books she canceled, people didn't get their money back. There was a big thing on Black Twitter, right? Tariq Nasheed.
Hmm. Yeah.
Next thing you know, hey, here's the new, as you said, here's the new grift. So I think that is something to consider as well. I even saw somebody was actually making an argument Pan-Africanism is the enemy.
Yeah, I saw
Right?
that. I saw
Tariq Nasheed put out a tweet stating that Pan-Africanism was created by the CIA.
that.
For crying out loud. And anyone who knows the history of Pan-Africanism knows that's not the case. Started with what?
Absolutely.
Henry Sylvester Williams, Trinidadian barrister, right?
Right.
Along with Miss Alicia Kinloch,
Mm.
right? Right? Late 1800s, early 19, we're talking late 19th century, right?
Cromell,
So, like,
Blyden, all of these
right,
people.
black, it's like, what the French toast are you talking about here?
Right.
So, once again, but if you don't know the history,
Hmm.
they could say this, make this claim, and you more than likely would believe them, right? So this is why I would argue these aren't individuals who are, of course, factual. And of course, we're going to get into the 19 Keys video
Yeah.
a little later, but this is why and once again, I didn't know who 19 Keys was.
Hmm.
One of my students came to my office and said, Dr. L, are you familiar with this guy? I said, no, I'm not. They said, check him out. I said, okay, no problem. Turn it on. 5 minutes in, I'm like, this is a bunch of bullshit.
Mm, right. Look, all right,
Yeah.
so we're gonna all right, so before we go there, just to add on to what you said, something that I saw that was so ironic and just kind of it it encapsulates what the whole movement is about, in my opinion. But it it was a, a brother. He had made a tweet, I believe, where he said that we are, and it went viral. We are, the average delineation tweet that they make every day, but it was a picture of a man standing at a grave that said African American, a brother standing and I guess pouring out some drink. And I was like, yo, that's literally an African you're pouring out libations. It's literally an African retention, right? And
Right.
uh,
That's
and
correct.
and and but it just goes to show again truth and facts. You can't let truth and facts get in the way of a good grift.
And if I could,
Mhm.
even that concept and idea of the concept African American beginning in 1988 is a verse of facts, right?
Right.
P. Thomas Fortune, along
Hmm.
with John Edward Bruce,
Hmm.
right? They created an organization in 1890 called the Afro-American Organization, for
Absolutely.
crying out loud. T.
Hmm.
Thomas Fortune, who we all know was, of course, a editor and, of course, journalist, one-time editor of the Negro World newspaper.
Yep.
If you don't know who Marcus Garvey is, check out the Negro World newspaper,
Hmm.
right? Was a strong proponent and advocate of the term African American for the Black community here in America, right? We find even the New York Times press clippings, right? The term African American being used back in the 1700s. So
Absolutely.
this concept and idea, once again, is adverse to facts, but people don't care about facts. And that's what I think is extremely dangerous.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so let's get to the 19 Keys video. It's a great reaction video. And as you mentioned, one of your students um, sent you the video and well, first I guess asked you, had you heard of 19 Keys? You said no. We sent you the video to check out, and it was the one of the interviews that I think that he was on the Breakfast Club,
Yes.
and um and so everybody make sure you definitely go not only subscribe to Dr. Lumumba's channel, but check that video out. It's a great video. All the content is great. Um, your first reaction whenever you watched the interview, before we get into some of the specifics, what was your first reaction?
So yeah, actually, I didn't watch it. I was just listening while I was working out,
Okay.
and I remember texting my student in between sets, like, "Man, this dude is a clown." He said, "Why?" And I said, once again, the privilege of being a PhD, having a
Mhm,
terminal degree, right? The privilege of being able to go to school and
mhm,
then have to go to graduate school and then, of course, October. I understand that's a privilege. I said he's off the bat making claims that are adverse to facts.
mhm,
And that's
mhm,
what I took issue with. So right away, I'm like, okay, this is someone who either you're being extremely intellectually disingenuous, which is a term we know Brother Dwayne likes to use on a regular
mhm.
basis, or you just don't French toast know what the hell you're talking about.
Right.
Either way, this is extremely problematic. I remember there was a time I was looking at joining an organization back in Ohio. So I show up to the orientation and I'm excited to be there. And decided not to join. And they asked me why. I said, well, we're doing the orientation. The facilitator made a number of claims about African history that were adverse to facts. And
Mhm,
one of the sisters, and I said I find it to be extremely disrespectful. And the sister said, "Well, I didn't know he was doing that." I said, "Yeah, because you didn't have the privilege of studying the history the way I did,
mhm,
right?"
mhm,
And some of the claims he was making was that traditional African societies were non-binary,
mm. Okay.
right? I'm like,
Mhm.
"Oh yeah, yeah, I see where
Yeah.
this is going."
Yeah.
Right. So I'm
Yeah.
gonna exit stage left, right?
Mhm,
So that was part of the issue, right?
mhm.
Another issue with 19 Keys was him mischaracterizing the civil rights movement,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yes. And I
As
find
though
they
it
do
was
that a lot.
Yes, and so once again, this shows that he hasn't actually done a deeper dive in terms of studying the history the way I have. Of course, I had the benefit of being a Black Studies major. I had to take classes on the history of the civil rights movement, not only as an undergraduate student, but also as a graduate, even doctoral student, right?
Mhm,
There's a great book for anyone. If you want to actually study and learn about the civil rights movement, there's a great book, two books actually. One is by Dr. Harvard Sitkoff. It's titled Struggle for Black Equality,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
That's the book I read as an undergraduate. Uh, there's several books I had to read in my doctoral program, but one that really took the cake, right, that summarizes is Understanding and Teaching the Civil Rights Movement by Dr. Hassan Kwame Jeffries. He is the brother of Councilman Jeffries from
Mm,
Brooklyn.
mhm.
And he's a professor at The Ohio State University, right? I took
Indeed,
his
indeed.
class.
Mhm.
And he really breaks down the fact that what we're really seeing here is this concept of the master narrative, right? Julian Bond, who of course was a civil rights activist, talked about the master narrative as a simplistic top-down rendition of history that really minimizes the agency of African people, African American people, and puts the focus on the federal government.
Right, right.
Um, when we talk about the civil rights movement, and there's a section in the book, part two, that is titled "Bigger Than a Hamburger,"
Mm,
right?
mhm,
And they talk about the civil rights movement was focused on what reshaping public policy, right? Public spaces by banning racial discrimination and public accommodations, right? It reformed the criminal justice system by eliminating all white juries.
mhm.
This isn't talked about when people talk about, and I'm not assimilationist or integrationist in any way, shape, or form. But once again, it's about what being historically accurate, right?
Right.
We talk about it redefined public safety by neutralizing racial terror groups, right? Reimagine a social safety net by spurning and creating new government-sponsored social services,
Mm,
right? And it refashioned neighborhoods by opening up housing on a non-discriminatory basis.
mhm.
People don't talk about these type of issues,
Right, right.
right? When we talk about the civil rights movement. So, and once again, you also find individuals almost glorifying and romanticizing segregation. You didn't live under Jim Crow. You don't know what
Right,
it's like to have to pay taxes, but
right,
guess what? You don't get sanitation services. You
right.
don't have indoor plumbing,
Mhm.
right? You don't the roads aren't even paved on your side of town,
Right, right,
right?
right,
So I don't want to hear that crap,
right.
right? Because you're
No,
being disrespectful.
absolutely. And it is extremely disrespectful. And have you noticed that a lot of people who even consider themselves a part of a larger conscious community will say that, oh man, they were just trying to get proximity to whiteness. And
No.
it's infuriating.
No, no, and respectfully, even Dr. Amos Wilson tends to make that claim a little bit in his
Hmm.
massive text, Blueprint for Black Power. He
Blueprint Black
calls,
Power. Yeah.
the civil rights movement a
Yeah.
consumer rights movement,
Hmm.
but it was much bigger and broader than that, right? And
Hmm.
part of the issue, once again, I tell people at the time was we're talking about taxation without representation.
Hmm.
And that was the major issue as well. The fact that, listen, if you were accused of a crime, you're guilty, guilty, guilty because it's an all-white jury,
Right. Right.
right? If we're talking about there were laws to where, black people couldn't even testify at one point
Hmm.
against a white person,
Right. Right.
right? If
Right.
we talk about, so yeah, it's extremely disingenuous, extremely disingenuous.
Right. And so when someone like 19 Keys comes on the Breakfast Club and mischaracterizes the civil rights movement like that, and again, he's a self-proclaimed thought leader
Yeah.
within the Black community and conscious community. Like, how harmful is that? Mischaracterization of such an important history on like one of the largest black platform. I want to say black platforms, but largest platforms that is, I guess, catered to black people. Um, can you just talk about like why that is a problem?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the terms that you used was counter-revolutionary, right? We
Hmm.
know one of the most powerful tools that the oppressor has is what the minds of the oppressed. But I'm
Hmm.
citing Steve Biko now, right?
Hmm.
And so what we tend to find are individuals, right? One that posit themselves, position themselves as thought leaders, tend to not what want to have conversations with individuals who actually are scholars, well-read, well studied, and knowledgeable of the particular issues that they're speaking about. The greatest example of that would be what your boy, right, Dr. Umar Ifantunde, right, Prince, Papa,
RB Jesus, as he calls
RBG,
it.
right, Marcus Garvey reincarnated, right,
RBG.
descendant, right, of
Yeah.
Dr. Umar Johnson, right? And so I've reached out to him. We used to converse on a regular basis. I met
Hmm.
him in 2011 at a Marcus Garvey celebration in Cincinnati.
Hmm.
Um, but we've been fine with him. I don't want to have conversations with individuals who can challenge me intellectually,
Hmm.
right? And I'm going to make a brief pivot because, of
Hmm.
course, we both are boxing connoisseurs.
Yeah.
And you may, grow up in the hood. You might have some guy who shows you a video of him sparring somebody who's
Hmm.
really a no-hoper,
Yeah. Yeah.
patronising.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
expect you to be impressed. Like, no, go do that
Mhm.
against someone who actually boxes on a regular basis.
Right.
I take you serious.
Right.
Then
Right.
I say you're oppressive,
Right.
right? You show me that you're him by beating someone else who's a dog as well.
Yep. Yep.
And you put two dogs in the ring, then we're gonna find out who's the wolf,
Right. Right.
right?
Right.
Right. Jerry West said I wasn't a dog, I was a wolf. I ate dogs, right?
Mm.
So, right, and that's the only time I report a white man. Okay, so, but so back to 19 Keys, right? So
Mhm.
part of that, of course, is counter revolutionary,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
The second issue is oftentimes when individuals do this, they actually are seeking to present themselves as a true and authentic form of what Black radical thought and leadership.
Right.
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 And
Right.
what they're able to do that because the individuals and entities that engage in those type of I would call revolutionary activities. They may not have been Pan-Africanists or Black radical members of Black radical tradition or audacious self-assertion, but they were fighting against, of course, white hegemony,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Aren't around anymore to defend themselves,
Yeah. Right. Right.
right? To push back, right?
Hmm.
We talk about this concept of it's easy to love Black heroes once they've transitioned,
Absolutely. Right.
right? Or when they can't speak for themselves
Hmm.
anymore.
Hmm.
Muhammad Ali,
Hmm.
Dr. King, Malcolm X. So now what they try to rebrand the narrative, right?
Hmm.
So something to consider there as well.
Yeah, for sure. Um, we went over some of the economic and political goals of the civil rights movement. But why do you think so many voices within the movement, like, Ella Baker, Fannie Lou
Mhm.
Hamer, or even Dr. King's political analysis when it comes to, capitalism and empire, um, why do you think so much of that has been removed from mainstream retelling of the civil rights movement?
Yeah, well, one, it goes against the master narrative,
Hmm.
right? Two, it's not palatable for what white people to digest,
Hmm.
right? And
Hmm.
three, there's a fear that if you mention these individuals, people begin to do a deeper dive.
Yes. Yes.
right? And
Hmm.
so one of my students, once again, kind of pushed back against Dr. King and said, "Man, he was da 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 da, and he was sleeping with white women." I said, "Well, there's no evidence to, substantiate that claim." I said,
Hmm.
"I've read Ralph Abernathy's memoir, and the walls come tumbling down. It's a massive text, 400, 500 some pages,
Hmm.
and he talks about in the text that." He only saw Dr. King with black women. He said if he had an attraction to white women, this is a direct quote in the book. He says, I wouldn't know about it because I never saw him with any.
Right.
And he says, I was kind of the one who was, the liaison between him and the women that he was, cheating with. One of the conversations about Dr. King is, well, how could he be a leader if, he was doing these type of things? Direct quote from, well, not going to give a direct quote, but I'm going to paraphrase from what Coretta Scott was
Hmm.
that she dealt with the issue with equanimity,
Yeah.
right? She said, I'm cool because
Yeah.
there's a bigger issue at play here.
Hmm.
So if
Hmm.
she didn't have a problem with it, why the French shows do you?
Right. Right. Right.
Right. But once again, that's an example of they're not around anymore to push back against these narratives. You see individuals, unfortunately, who maybe lack the education and knowledge about particular issues, taking a narrative, taking a concept, an idea, and then running with it. And so also, as a good brother Dwayne talks about, this also was a push and employed by the CIA,
Hmm.
right? Just trying to
Hmm.
discredit, undermine the work that Dr. King was doing.
Yes.
And I tell people all the time, he may not have been a Pan-Africanist, but we did find him moving towards this concept of Black internationalism, right?
Hmm.
He was taken away from us. But I said, this man was sincere. How do you know that? Because he made the ultimate sacrifice.
Yes. Right.
And he knew that he was going to be taken out because the day before, when he was in Memphis, Tennessee, April 3rd, 1968, he said, what? I've seen the mountaintop. I may not get there with you. Same as Malcolm X when he was being interviewed a week before his assassination. He said, but it's time for martyrs now.
Hmm.
Right? So they
Hmm.
could have capitulated. They could have acquiesced. Right? They could have ran with their tail in between their legs, but they said, no, I know that this is bigger than myself.
Hmm.
Right? And so we need to put some respect on his name. And we know whenever we mention Dr. King, we need to make sure we're mentioning Coretta Scott as well,
Yes.
right? Because we know
Hmm.
in the history of what African people, whenever we fought against oppression, it's been the man and the woman lockstep together, right?
Absolutely.
Matter of fact, I was on a clown's No Fugazi, his podcast. He's a clown, right? And the guy was making a claim, nonsensical claim that the reason why America is going hell in a handbasket is because, and that's of course that's a white nationalist frame of reference, right? The fact
Hmm.
that they do not have a monopoly on the positions of power and privilege and influence anymore. America's going to hell in a handbasket,
Right.
right? This
Hmm.
victim narrative they like to push. And he's regurgitating this and he said, well, part of it's because women had the right to vote. I said, did you know that black women had the right to vote in Africa, in medieval Africa, long before white women in Europe did? Because he was referencing European history. I said, but you're a black man, what the French host we're talking about here,
Right. Right.
right? And then he says, "Well, can you give me?" He said, Did they serve in the military?" I said, "Actually, yes. That was a cultural expectation that women would serve in the military if needed." He
Mm.
says, "Can you give an example of women serving in the military and them defeating European powers?" I said, "Absolutely. I could give you two, not one, two, because like I said before, what we can't have
You
one of
do it.
anything. We
Yeah.
need two. I don't have two. I don't have one bachelor's degree. I have two. I don't have one master's degree. I have two, but I'm
Ooh
gonna stay
wee.
on one PhD.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
can't do
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
again."
Yeah.
I said one will be Ethiopia, Battle of Ottawa.
Mm.
Fuck with your
Mm.
boy, right?
Hmm.
I said number two would be a derivative of African, that's Haiti.
Mm. Mm.
Quiet, church
Hmm.
mouse, crickets. You don't shut your
Hmm.
dumb ass up. You know the French toast you're talking about. This is the problem we have here,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And then you're
Yeah.
disseminating information for people, and you don't even know what. And you're providing false and misinformation,
Hmm.
right? Extremely problematic. Extremely problematic.
Yes, it is. It is. And then, they get some type of popularity and then their
Mhm.
their their fans begin to repeat the same misinformation that they learn from them, and it just becomes more pervasive. And we have to continue to be loud about them being wrong. Um, People get on me sometimes, but I don't have any problems shaming people who purposefully do that. You know what I
Oh yeah,
mean?
you
Because
should.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, that's
and
part of our culture as well.
mhm,
Shame.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Real talk, real talk. And so in the 19 Keys video, you spoke, and we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but you spoke about the rise of what I say pseudo voices in Black media who make bold but unsubstantiated claims about our conditions. What are your thoughts on how that impacts our broader liberation movements?
Absolutely. So Malcolm X stated, and this was an interview he was doing. I can't recall who was interviewing him, but he stated that if you're on the wrong road, there's no way you're going to get to the right or proper destination. Right. And so when we talk about the 19 Keys video, he made a number of claims that were, of course, bold, audacious, but of course, adverse to facts and primate, just absolutely false. I can recall once again, and I know I'm kind of backtracking a bit, during my interview with Afro Elite, right? I like to call him Afrophobia, but that's a conversation for another day,
Hmm.
right? He
Afrophobia.
mentions, right? He mentioned, I'm sorry, my composure, right?
No.
He mentioned the fact that Black West Indian and African immigrants were a sizable amount of the immigration, groups population that were coming every year. So I looked it up and found that wasn't the case. Of the top five, it was Asian and Latino
Mm,
and European. So what the
mm.
hell are we talking about here, right?
Right.
So part of that is this myth of the boogeyman, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
We're going to create an enemy that we believe we can defeat because we can't actually fight against the actual entity that is responsible for our social, political, and economic quagmire.
Also too, like as far as what he said about Black studies, and as you mentioned, San Francisco State, and then you had places like Cornell, and it was like
Mhm.
guerrilla warfare tactics that were going on these
Mhm.
campuses to
Mhm.
get this, to get these.
Yeah, yeah, they were actual agents. Like, for example, Black Studies, 1968, San Francisco State University.
Mhm,
As a result, they created the Black Cultural Center.
mhm,
1969, my hometown, Dayton, Ohio, Wright State University, the Blingle Center was created. One of my mentors, Baba Kwaku Larry Crow,
mm,
who was a member of the Institute for Positive Education in Chicago, worked with Hockey Armada Booty to create the World Press,
mhm,
right, was a member of KABU, the Coalition for the Advancement of Black Unity at Wright State University. They were pushing and advocating, protesting, fighting militantly for a Black Culture Center on campus to the point where there was a member of the CIA or FBI who actually infiltrated the group and
mm.
was an agent provocateur,
Wow.
where
Wow.
that literally told one of the members, "Hey, the president is blowing you all off. I know you're pissed off. I have a gun. Maybe you should use it and shoot him."
Hmm. Wow.
They later found out later, based on Freedom of Information Act,
Hmm.
that this individual was an agent.
Right.
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 So what the claims they are making are absolutely false. But once again, I know the history. I'm connected to the history. And of course, my dissertation was on Black culture. And so I had to review the history. That
Hmm.
these, like you say, were militantly fighting. There were individuals who were being physically assaulted on campus. We're talking about at San Francisco State in particular, right?
Yep.
Individuals who were losing their jobs.
Absolutely.
Right. There was a
Hmm.
brother who was a former Black Panther who was an instructor. And I
Hmm.
think he was a graduate student as well. He lost his job by advocating for, of course, there being a Black Studies program at San Francisco State University. And this clown,
Mm.
because we have a lot of guys, they put on a funny hat, start talking, all you think they're supposed to have some insight to something they really don't know about, is
Hmm.
arguing that this was something that was funded by the government.
Right.
But that was counter-revolutionary. The second issue he brought up once he made the argument that, he tried to push back against Black cultural nationalism. And there are some accurate critiques of Black cultural nationalism, but he argued they were pushing Black cultural nationalism because they wanted us to have this surface level view of what we were empowered and we were proud of who we were. No, I'm familiar with the work of Dr. Malana Karinga. I read Dr. Scott Brown's book, Malana Karinga, Fighting for Us, Malana Karinga in the US organization, The Rise of Black Cultural Nationalism, right? And those brothers and sisters were engaging in many of the same initiatives and programs as the Black Panther Party. The difference was they were doing so from an African-centered frame of reference.
Hmm.
One of the greatest critiques that I've ever found being made of the Black Panther Party was by Assata Shakur in her memoir, Assata to Queen Mother Ashada, right?
Absolutely.
She stated that they had no knowledge of Black history and culture at all.
Mm.
And that was it, really made her take a step back and say, this may not be the organization for me.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right. And the other issue was the reason why Black cultural nationalism, particularly us organization, which there are some critiques. We know what happened with those two sisters who they
Yes.
thought were agents,
Hmm.
don't receive the notoriety is because they were a local organization and it wasn't national in scope the way the Black Panther Party was, right?
Hmm.
But once again, you have to do a deeper dive and actually know and review the scholarly literature, right, to know that.
Right. Oh yeah. Absolutely. And that's not anything that he's doing
No.
apparently. And he doesn't. He has time on his hands, so I can't give
Yes.
him a pass. And if you position yourself as someone who is a thought leader for our people, man, you got to have it right and exact. And it's not like it's not, and we're not. Nobody's holding anyone on a pedestal where we're saying, "Hey, there's no room for error.
Correct.
You can't make any mistakes." I
Correct.
mean, we're all here to, be each other's keeper and correct
Yeah.
each other when we're wrong. But this is not what we're seeing here. This is someone who, again, and a lot, you mentioned something earlier, and I noticed this whenever I have had discourses with some of these people online, is whenever they find you intellectually competent and can challenge the narratives and false history that they are given, they'll block you because they can't allow their quote unquote fan base to see them be challenged in that manner.
Mhm.
Because they have to give the air of I am never wrong. I am infallible. And
Yeah.
I notice it's somewhat cultish.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. And it's whenever the sad thing is, again, our people are looking for something, you know,
Very true.
and
Yes.
especially in times like this, and you have to have a real political analysis to give them. Um, and I feel like anytime there's not one, and it's more of maybe some fantastical ideas that make you feel better. That's not what we need at the moment. And one of the things that um I really just, and I know again, we mentioned the class component within this, but if you can do all that you can to educate yourself as much as you can, whether like if you got 5 books, you know, and read them five, get on if you got access to the internet, um, you know, uh there's ways to get, free PDFs, you don't have
Yes.
to always pay
Purchase
for
the
it.
book, right?
Yeah, and so I just feel like we have to continue to educate ourselves so we don't fall for pseudo history and again when it comes to our politics and things like that, um, man, we got to be on point with that, especially in these days and times. And if I don't see any type of critique or analysis on Western imperialism and white hegemony, then I'm just not interested.
Yeah, but you know, this is someone who isn't serious. I can recall once again having an exchange with Dynasty Mir where we did a show regarding Trump pulling foreign aid, particularly the effect it had on South Africa, to where
Hmm.
I think 18% of their budget included foreign aid, and as a result, there were brothers and sisters, boots on the ground in South Africa, who would not have access to the medical supplies that they needed.
Hmm.
And so Dinah said, well, he talked about this book. His sister wrote a book, and I used to term sister loosely because she's, white-minded, called Dead Aid. He's
Hmm.
like, are you familiar with the book Dead Aid? I said, not only am I familiar with the book, I have it and I've read it twice because I have a master's degree in African studies.
Yeah.
Right? So you should know if you're trying to go there, we can go there.
Yeah,
But I
yeah,
said, but
yeah.
here's the issue. I said, one, in the book, she talks about there being a what? Stair-step approach to reducing aid,
Hmm.
not a cold turkey approach.
Hmm.
Secondly, but in the book, she talks about, developing African economies by we're getting rid of aid and being dependent on what credit,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
once again hamstrings African economies and puts them back in a cycle in which they're dependent on what foreign largesse. But she doesn't discuss colonialism,
Right.
neoliberalism, or Western countries fomenting coups and civil unrest to destabilize African markets.
Right.
He doesn't
Right.
discuss any of this. So I said, I
Right.
can't take you serious. I
You
can't
know,
take you serious.
see, that's my problem with a lot of those nativist groups is I've had, debates back and forth with them, and then um you mentioned the effects of Western imperialism on the global South, and then, especially in response to how they view immigration, right? And they never ask the question, okay, so why are immigrants coming over here in the first place? Why does America have all of this wealth? Why are the nations that they're coming from, why are a lot of their economies destabilized? How did this happen, right? They have this idea of American exceptionalism in
Right.
blackface. And it's
Yeah.
so weird. It's so weird, man. The last thing I wanted to ask you, good doctor, is this: with all these nativist groups now teaching a doctrine of delineation and separation, who really benefits from African Americans severing ties with the continent and the rest of the African diaspora?
Well, I think that's a great question, a great way to end. So one, Kwame Ture, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael, we know Trinidad and today Trinidadian born,
Hmm.
was Bronx, New York raised, Howard University educated, taught us that the highest expression of Black power is Pan-Africanism, right?
Mm,
We know that there have been information there's been information put out by the federal government stating that Pan-Africanism was the biggest threat to American influence globally, right?
absolutely.
Particularly on the continent, even in, of course, in the West Indies and
Hmm.
Caribbean. I would argue the power structure benefits, right? And I would argue Pan-Africanism once is still relevant, right? We see the benefit of Pan-Africanism in the Sahel Alliance,
Hmm.
right? That's taking place on the continent right
Absolutely.
now.
Hmm.
I think with what's going on in Haiti right now, unfortunately, Pan-Africanism is needed if we're truly going to be able to help our brothers and sisters in Haiti restore themselves to their traditional greatness as a free, proud, and productive people who were, of course, the first Black republic here in the Western Hemisphere. And I would even argue for the FBA and the ADOS community when there's this push and advocacy for reparations. We know that there needs to be an international push to support our positions. Malcolm X knew this. This is why he had, of course, the backing of 5 African nation states to support him going to the United Nations and charging the United States with crimes against humanity for the treatment of African Americans. That, of
Hmm.
course, once again, is an example of Pan-Africanism not being a one-way street, right? But these things are needed and necessary if we want to truly, truly gain the what seize the initiative and change our position here, particularly here in America, politically, socially, and economically.
Hmm.
And
Indeed.
as Kwame Nkrumah taught us, if we are vulgarly nationalistic in our politics, we will simply be played against each other like pawns on a chessboard.
Mm. And with that note, I would like to request everybody to make sure you are subscribed to Dr. Lumumba's channel. Again, it's great content on there. It's great conversation. Also, his dissertation is online, as we mentioned.
Yeah, because it is online because I am a real doctor,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, you're not.
So
Because
I
look,
know there's a lot of
look,
people
there is
nowadays
there. Look,
claiming
and
that they're doctors and they're PhDs. Some have gone to unaccredited
yeah.
institutions. I got my PhD from Ohio University, which is a tier 1 research intensive institution in the great state of Ohio. So I am a actual doctor.
Indeed, and so everybody make sure you read his dissertation. It's amazing, and why Pan-Africanism is needed and is the solution for African people. Dr. Lumumba, thank you for taking the time out and coming to build with me at Wazza Dome TV. I definitely would like to have you on again sometime.
No problem. I would love to.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you.